Copper Dunes learnt to fear silence the night the barking stopped. For hours, the desert had echoed with shouts, engines, rotor blades, and the clipped commands of tired officers sweeping the sand in straight lines. By sunset, even hope sounded hoarse. The missing posters with Lily Harper's school photo fluttered on the hood of a patrol car, the edges already curling from the heat. Her mother's voice had cracked so many times that the paramedic finally pressed a cup of water into her shaking hands just to make her sit. Then, at the far edge of the search grid, 2 German shepherds froze mid-step. Bolt's paw hung over the sand, suspended, his chest expanding as he drew in a long, deliberate breath. Nova's head tilted, gold eyes narrowing on a patch of nothing. No tracks, no scrap of clothing. Just empty ground glowing orange in the dying light. Officer Jenna Park felt the leashes go tight, not like a dog seeing a rabbit, but like 2 living wires suddenly charged. "Easy," she whispered, though her own pulse wasn't listening. The air shifted. A smell slid through the dust. Old sweat, gasoline, sunburnt rope, and something Jenna could never quite name later, except that it felt wrong. Bolt's lips peeled back in a silent snarl. Nova's tail stiffened. Then she let out a single bark that didn't sound like an alert. It sounded like a warning. "K9's got something," Detective Elena Cruz barked into her radio. "All units, shift to Sector 9. Move now." The dogs didn't wait. They hauled Jenna off the road, down a rocky slope, through brittle brush that clawed at uniforms and skin. Officers stumbled after them, cursing under their breath, until Bolt suddenly dropped to his belly beside a half-buried post. Under a filthy blanket, tied so tight her hands had turned the color of the sky before dawn, Lily Harper opened her eyes. She didn't look at the officers. She stared at the dogs. "He said you'd find me," she rasped. "And he said this isn't the first time." Dust rolled across the highway in slow waves as the sun sank over the desert town of Copper Dunes. Patrol cars lined the edge of the sand like a broken necklace of red and blue. Officers shouted into their radios, helicopters circled above, and somewhere out there a 6-year-old girl named Lily Harper was alone. Or worse, not alone at all. For 8 hours they had found nothing. No footprints that made sense, no broken fence, no abandoned vehicle. Just heat, silence, and the kind of dread that crawls under a cop's skin. Hope was thinning with the daylight when 2 German shepherds at the edge of the search grid suddenly froze. Bolt's ears snapped forward. Nova's tail went rigid. Their handler, Officer Jenna Park, felt the leashes go tight like steel cables. "What is it, you 2?" she whispered, though the hot wind snatched the words almost as soon as they left her mouth. Bolt growled first. A low sound that made the hairs rise on the back of Jenna's neck. Nova answered with a sharper bark, staring into the dunes as if something out there was staring back. The wind shifted. A scent hit them. Fear, sweat, rope, and something else. But whatever it was, it made both dogs surge forward so hard, Jenna almost lost her grip. Units, Bravo and Charlie. "K9s have something," Detective Elena Cruz shouted into her radio. "Repeat, K9s have a live trail." The search line broke. Officers scrambled after the dogs as Bolt and Nova tore into the desert, weaving between bushes and rocks, claws digging deep grooves into the baked ground. They weren't wandering. They were chasing something specific and urgent, like they had just heard a clock start counting down. Jenna stumbled after them, boots sliding on loose stones, her heartbeat hammering loud enough to drown out the helicopter overhead. Around her, the desert swallowed every other sound. No traffic, no voices, just panting dogs, crunching gravel, and the hiss of grit beneath her soles. Somewhere behind, at the command post, Lily's mother clutched a borrowed jacket around her shoulders despite the lingering heat. She could not see the dogs, the dust, or the ragged line of officers disappearing over the rise. She only stared at the horizon where her daughter had vanished, whispering the same broken plea over and over, just let her come home. At the top of the low hill, Bolt stopped so suddenly that Jenna lurched forward. Nova planted herself beside him, muscles quivering, nose testing the air. Both shepherds locked on a narrow gully ahead, half hidden by scrub and shadow. Easy, Jenna breathed, more to herself than to them. Her hand tightened on the leashes, but she already knew she would follow wherever they pulled. Elena crested the rise a second later, sweat shining along her jaw, eyes scanning the terrain. "Talk to me, Park." "They've got something real," Jenna said. "I can feel it." The wind pushed past them, carrying a heavier taste now, sour and metallic, the smell of old blood that had baked and thinned under the sun. Bolt's lips peeled back, teeth flashing white. Nova let out a short, strangled whine and then surged forward again. They dragged the team down into the gully. Thorny branches clawed at uniforms, scratching exposed skin. Small stones rolled underfoot, turning each step treacherous. The helicopter's rotor wash faded behind the ridgeline until it sounded like it belonged to another planet. Halfway down, Officer Mark Walker slipped and slammed a hand against the rock face to steady himself. "Slow down! Somebody get a light down there!" But the dogs did not slow. They lunged toward a crooked fence post left over from some forgotten property line, the wood gray and splintered, half swallowed by drifting sand. At its base lay a filthy blanket, edges rippling weakly in the breath of the desert. Bolt stopped dead and began to bark, each sharp sound punching a hole in the heavy air. Nova circled once, nose glued to the ground, then pressed herself against the blanket and whined. Jenna's throat went dry. "Oh, God," she whispered, "please don't be too late." She dropped to her knees and yanked the blanket aside. A small body lay curled against the post, wrists bound behind her with frayed rope that had bitten deep into the skin. Sunburn reddened her cheeks. Dust streaked her hair. Lips cracked, eyelids fluttering, Lily Harper stared up at them from a face that was both ghost pale and heat flushed. For a frozen second, nobody moved. The desert held its breath with them. Then training snapped back into place. "Paramedics!" Elena shouted, her voice cracking the spell. "We've got her! Lily Harper located, alive but in distress. Get me medics and a stretcher now." Officers exploded into motion, calling coordinates, clearing a path, and tearing open water bottles. Someone slid a hand under Lily's head. Someone else shielded her from the sun with their body. Through all of it, Bolt and Nova stayed close, bodies low, eyes fixed on the girl as if she were the only point of reality in the spinning world. Lily's gaze drifted past the unfamiliar faces, the uniforms and the badges. Her eyes settled on the dogs. Her bound fingers twitched, trying and failing to reach them. Jenna eased Bolt closer, letting him sniff her cheek. His tail flicked once, a tiny movement, almost reverent. Nova nudged Lily's shoulder with a damp nose, breathing in the faint salt of tears that wouldn't quite fall. "You're safe now," Jenna said softly. "We've got you. You're going home." For a moment, it seemed Lily didn't hear. Her lashes trembled. A slow, rattling breath crawled into her lungs and hovered there, as if unsure whether to stay. Then she focused, really focused, on Bolt's steady eyes and Nova's tilted head, and something inside her loosened enough to let words scrape through. "He said you'd come," she rasped, her voice so small Jenna almost thought she imagined it. "He said the dogs would find me." Elena leaned closer, pen forgotten in her hand, every detective's instinct roaring awake. "Lily, who said that? Can you tell me?" The girl swallowed, throat working against dryness and fear. Her next sentence came in a jagged whisper that seemed to grow heavier with every syllable. "He said, I'm just the first one you'll save." The gully went silent again. Far above, the helicopter turned another slow circle, its shadow passing over the town that still thought this was one tragedy with one villain and one little girl who had gotten very, very lucky. What Lily had just told them did not feel like luck at all, and nobody, not Elena, not Jenna, not the officers gasping in the heat, was ready for what those words would drag out of the desert before the night was over. In that narrow cut of land, with sirens wailing faintly in the distance and dust hanging like smoke around their boots, every person there felt the ground under Copper Dunes quietly shift forever. What happened after those words would shake Copper Dunes, and the entire state, to its core. Copper Dunes was a small desert town pressed between sand and sky. Low houses stood behind chain-link fences, and a sun that always felt too close. In summer, the heat rose off the pavement in waves and wrapped itself around people's lungs until even breathing felt like work. On the day 6-year-old Lily Harper disappeared, that heat arrived before noon. The wind dragged grit along cracked sidewalks and rattled a loose gutter in front of the Harpers' blue house on Mesa Drive. Inside, the place smelt of coffee, laundry soap, and the strawberry cereal Lily insisted on every morning. A bowl sat in the sink with a pink ring of milk at the bottom. Her unicorn backpack waited by the door. The morning had been ordinary. Lily bounced around the kitchen, pigtails swinging, narrating her own cartoon version of the day. Her father, Daniel, packed his lunch at the counter while pretending not to see her hand steal carrot sticks. Her mother, Claire, checked the time on the oven, counting the minutes until her shift and the time it took Lily to knot laces. Sunlight slipped through the blinds and drew pale bars across Lily's unicorn t-shirt as she asked if cats ever got report cards. The last time they saw her, nothing felt strange. Daniel stepped into the backyard to drag the trash bin toward the alley. Pickup day always sneaked up on him. Claire went down the hall to grab a sweater from the closet because the forecast had dared to mention cooler air after sundown. Lily stood at the open front door, talking through the screen to the neighbor's orange cat about bravery and dentists. Daniel remembered hearing that little voice and thinking she suddenly sounded older. The trash can banged against the fence. The drawer stuck for half a second. Then Claire's voice cut through the house. "Lily? The door stays shut, remember?" "Lily?" Silence answered. When Daniel reached the front, the screen door moved lazily on its hinges. The porch was empty. Chalk drawings curled at the edges on the steps, half-finished suns and crooked flowers. No small figure in the yard, no flash of pink shoes on the walk, no squeal from behind the tree. The street held only heat and a shimmering ribbon of distance. The first minutes blurred. Claire checked under beds, inside closets, and behind the couch, saying their daughter's name so often it stopped sounding like a word. Daniel ran to the nearest houses, knocking until his knuckles stung, asking if anyone had seen a little girl with dark braids and a unicorn shirt. Phones appeared, doors opened. Neighbors shaded their eyes and joined the calling. Lily's name bounced off stucco walls, then faded. By the time Claire dialed dispatch, her hands shook so badly she could barely hit the buttons. The operator's calm questions, age, height, clothing, last place she stood, how long she had been out of sight, stacked up like stones. Within minutes, the first patrol car rolled to a stop at the curb, its light bar already turning. Officers stepped out, scanning the block with faces that shifted from routine to serious as each answer landed. Detective Elena Cruz pulled up shortly after, engine still ticking as she crossed the yard. She had grown up 2 streets over, left for the academy, and come back with a badge and a list of cases she wished had never existed. Dark hair pinned up, sleeves rolled, she carried a notepad open to a clean page, and the tightness in her chest that always came with missing child calls. Sergeant Mark Walker arrived as another squad car slid into place. Tall and broad-shouldered, with lines of tired worry around his mouth, he took in the scene in one sweep. Parents on the porch, officers spreading along the sidewalk, neighbors clustering at the corners. His voice stayed even as he repeated Lily's description into his radio, but his knuckles whitened around the mic. At the station, the quiet afternoon shattered. The duty sergeant pinned a fresh map of the town and surrounding sand to the wall, carving it into squares with colored markers. Volunteers lined up to sign their names and take reflective vests. The air conditioning hummed under the weight of open doors and too many bodies. In a small interview room, Claire sat in a hard plastic chair, shoulders hunched, fingers locked around Lily's unicorn hairbrush as though it were the last solid thing left. Daniel stared at the photograph on the table so intently it seemed he might pull their daughter back by focus alone. Elena sat opposite them, pen hovering, guiding them through the same details slowly. What Lily ate, which shoes she wore, whether she ever wandered, how far she could walk alone, what she said to the cat. Every answer nudged the picture in Elena's mind from hopeful to urgent. Outside, the K-9 unit prepared. Officer Jenna Park opened the back of the truck, where 2 kennels waited side by side. Bolt and Nova watched her through the doors, ears forward, bodies still in that focused way working dogs held when the world shrank to the next task. Bolt, heavier through the shoulders, carried a steady presence that made people step aside. Nova, leaner, crackled with contained energy that showed in the small twitch of her tail. Today, their noses were being asked to outrun the desert. Jenna checked each collar and leash, then accepted a sealed evidence bag from an officer. Inside lay a small T-shirt, folded once, smelling of soap and faint morning sweat. She let Bolt take the scent first, then Nova. Both inhaled, blinked once, and their focus sharpened. In the conference area, Elena tapped the map with the end of a pen. "We start here," she said, drawing a path from the Harper home toward open sand. "Patrol units sweep every street in pairs. Volunteers take yards, lots, and drainage ditches. K-9 runs point along likely exit routes. We don't assume she walked off. We treat every block like it matters." Mark nodded. "If she's out there, we find her before the sun drops. And that heat doesn't forgive slow decisions." A radio answered with a burst of static and a string of unit numbers checking in. The certainty spread that nobody here would stand still and just hope. They would move. If you're a parent, you already feel that tightness in your chest, that edge of panic at the thought of a small hand slipping from yours. Stay with this story, because what these 2 dogs are about to do out there in the dust will restore some of your faith in the world. Jenna clipped the leashes to Bolt and Nova and stepped toward the open bay doors with them flanking her like living shadows. Elena grabbed her notebook and Mark his radio. Officers filed out into the glaring afternoon. Copper Dunes might have been small and easy to miss on a state map, but as the search grid formed and the first lines of people moved toward the desert, the town closed ranks around one missing girl and the fragile hope that somewhere ahead, 2 sets of paws could still outrun the worst possibilities. The search line pushed out from Copper Dunes until the town shrank to a pale strip against the horizon. Out here there were no fences or driveways, only sand, scrub, and sun. Officers moved in a loose arc, boots crunching in the dust, eyes combing the ground for anything that did not match. Radios hissed and cracked at their hips. Sweat ran under vests. Nobody talked about being tired yet. They followed the dogs. Bolt trotted at the front with his head low, ears flicking at sounds the others could not hear. Nova tracked a little to the right, weaving between clumps of brush and scattered rock. Their leashes ran back to Officer Jenna Park's hands, thin lines tying the whole operation to a scent that could not be seen. Heat shimmered above the ground, turning the distant patrol cars into wavering shapes and blurring the edge of the town behind them. Jenna's calves burnt, and grit clung to the sweat on her neck, but she kept her attention locked on the dogs. She watched tails, shoulders, and the angle of each paw as it landed. Bolt's stride had a firm, focused rhythm. Nova's stiff tail told her this was not routine work. They were not casting around. They were following something real, threading along the path Lily Harper had taken before she vanished. Behind them, Detective Elena Cruz checked the GPS clipped to her vest and marked another point with her thumb. Sergeant Mark Walker spoke into his radio in low bursts, steering units on the edges of the grid so nobody drifted too far from the line. Volunteers farther back carried extra water and first aid packs. The desert swallowed most of the sound almost at once, leaving them wrapped in a thin hush broken only by short commands and rough breathing. For a while, the trail stayed steady. Bolt and Nova followed a line that bent away from the road and slid between low ridges. Dry brush scratched at pant legs. Brittle twigs snapped under heavy boots. Every so often, Bolt would pause with his nose pressed to the ground, drawing in slow, careful breaths before drifting slightly left or right and then moving on. Nova circled once or twice, crossing his path, then settled back beside him. To the officers, the sand all looked the same. To the dogs, it was a page filled with faint letters. "How's it look?" Mark called quietly. Elena glanced from the GPS to the landscape. "Still straight," she answered. "No random turns?" Whoever took her knew where he wanted to go. The idea settled like a stone under the heat in Jenna's chest. A straight trail meant purpose, not confusion. Someone had walked this way before and felt comfortable leading a child into emptiness. Bolt's pace changed. His trot shortened into slow, measuring steps, nose hovering just above the surface. Nova slid closer until their shoulders almost brushed. Jenna tightened her grip on the leashes. "Easy," she breathed. "Show me." A few yards later, Bolt stopped outright. He planted his paws and stared at the ground. Nova froze beside him, golden eyes fixed on a patch of sand that looked normal from where the others stood. "Hold up," Mark said. The line checked itself, boots falling still. Jenna stepped in front of Bolt and crouched, following the angle of his muzzle. Up close, the ground told a different story. A faint crescent pressed into the dust, heel barely there, toes blurred by wind. A small footprint, light, quick, set down by someone who had not yet been forced to leave deeper marks. Elena dropped beside her. "Size fits," she murmured. She was still walking here. Not being carried yet. Jenna let her gaze slide forward and found another mark. A shallow groove running downhill, as if small feet had stumbled and been pulled along. Nearby, a low bush showed a fresh break where a branch had snapped clean instead of bending. Caught on one thorn was a scrap of color. Jenna reached out carefully and freed it. A narrow hair tie, pink, dotted with tiny white stars. "Her mom talked about this," she said softly. "She said she fights wearing anything else." Bolt whined, nostrils flaring toward the band before dropping back to the dust. He drew in a burst of quick breaths, then pulled off at a sharper angle, circling the bush and tracing a new line. Nova followed, tail rigid, head level. Whatever they had picked up here felt stronger, not weaker. Elena snapped a few photos, marked the spot on her map, and pushed herself upright. "We move," she said. "This isn't where they stopped." As the line advanced, the ground changed underneath them. Soft sand gave way to cracked clay and patches of gravel. Cactus grew in tight clusters that stood like green spears, each spine catching the light. Officers picked their way along narrow paths between them, careful to avoid the needles. The sun had started its slow slide downward, turning the light from harsh white to heavy gold. Bolt slipped through gaps in the cactus with easy, practiced motions, weaving when there was space, sidestepping when there was not. Nova hopped across small gullies, landing lightly on her feet, never letting the leash go slack. Once, Jenna's boot rolled on a hidden stone, and she pitched forward with a sharp breath. But Bolt braced and steadied her without losing focus. "You good?" Mark asked. "Fine," she answered, even though her heart hammered. "They're locked in." That was the thing about these dogs. When they believed a life depended on their nose, they did not argue with heat or distance. When the trail thinned, they slowed. When it thickened, they surged. More and more now they veered away from the neat line Elena had drawn on her grid. She frowned at the GPS once, saw the curve, then snapped it shut and followed. Ink could be wrong. Scent usually was not. The first discarded thing they found lay half-buried under a tumbleweed. Bolt cut toward it so sharply that Nova bumped his flank. He lowered his head and let out a short huff. Jenna stepped closer. A small sneaker sat wedged under the dry branches. Toes scuffed, laces knotted. The cartoon unicorn on the side had been scraped almost colorless, but enough glitter still clung to catch the fading light. Elena lifted it with gloved fingers. Sand poured from the opening in a thin stream. "Matches her shoe," she said quietly. "Same brand, same design." Mark's jaw clenched. He didn't even bother to hide it. "Or he wanted proof she'd been here," Elena replied. "Either way, we know we're still on her path." Bolt paced in tight circles, nose drawing loops between the shoe, the cactus, and a patch of crushed brush beyond. Several stems bent in the same direction, pointing toward a shallow dip in the land. Nova mirrored him on the far side. Jenna watched them reach the same decision and loosened the leashes just enough to let them lead. The air felt different as they dropped into the dip. A hot earth smell mixed with something sour that made even the humans wrinkle their noses. Nova's hackles rose. Bolt's tail dropped a notch, his head lowering until his nose almost brushed the ground. Their easy trot had vanished, replaced by quick, exact turns that cut shallow curves across the wash. "They keep shifting," a younger officer muttered. "Feels like we're wandering now." Jenna shook her head. "Wind tangles everything out here. They're sorting it. Trust them." As if on cue, Bolt halted at the lip of a narrow gully carved by rare storms. The sides sloped down into a channel lined with packed clay and smooth stones. Fresh scuffs marked several rocks where something heavier than a rabbit had slid. Nova dropped into the gully. She sniffed along one side, then stopped over a long, shallow groove etched into the surface. Her chest expanded as she drew in a slow breath. Elena slid down beside her and followed the groove with her eyes. "Drag marks," she said. "Something was pulled through here not long ago." Jenna pictured small legs giving out, a light body slumping, and a stronger arm refusing to stop. Her stomach turned, but her voice stayed even. "Where now?" Nova lifted her head and turned toward the right bank. At the same moment, Bolt, still up on the rim, swung his muzzle in the same direction. They climbed together, as if pulled by the same invisible cord, and broke into a brisk trot. Ahead, a low strand of dark rock rose from the sand. Sparse brush clung to its base, leaves coated in dust. Bolt slowed as they approached, nostrils flaring. Nova's tail became a rigid line. At a narrow gap between two boulders, Bolt stopped and locked in place. Nova crept forward, sniffed along the stone, and froze at a small dark patch near the ground. Elena stepped closer and squinted. At first, she saw only rough texture. Then the pattern sharpened into a fresh boot print, pressed into dust that had not had time to settle flat. In the strip of softer sand beside it lay the blurred outline of a smaller foot and a smeared mark where a knee had slid. Above the prints, caught in the twig of a low bush, a short strip of gray tape fluttered with each breath of air. Jenna felt the hairs on her arms rise. The tape rocked gently, as though the person who had ripped it away might still be close enough to watch it move. Bolt had been pulling them along the gully in a steady rhythm when he stopped so abruptly that Jenna almost walked into him. 1 second his nose skimmed the dust, the next his head snapped left. Nova, pacing the opposite bank, froze as well, her body turning in the same direction. Both stared toward the open stretch of desert that lay outside the neat lines of the search grid. Jenna felt the leashes drag against her palms as the tension changed. This was not the small adjustment they made when wind twisted scent. This was a decision. Bolt drew in a slow, deep breath, chest expanding, then let out a low rumble that made the hairs along her arms lift. Nova's tail, usually a calm, steady flag, stiffened. Her lips rose just enough to show the tips of her teeth. "Something change?" Sergeant Mark Walker called, already reading the answer on Jenna's shoulders. "They're pulling off the original line," she said, eyes locked on the dogs. Either the trail turned, or they just found something stronger. Bolt did not wait for more questions. He lunged sideways, dragging Jenna up the slope of the gully toward a stand of scrub. Nova shot after him, body low and sure. Gravel slid under Jenna's boots as she scrambled to keep up, breath catching in her throat. Behind her, Elena Cruz closed her notebook, folded the corner of the map, and lifted an arm to swing the line. The grid they had drawn back at the station bent to match the path the dogs chose out here. They crested the bank and stepped onto open ground. The town sat far behind them now, a faint smudge on the horizon. Ahead lay cactus clusters, scattered stones and rippling earth. Bolt's trot slowed to a careful stalk. His head swayed as he sampled the air. With each step his hackles edged higher, a dark ridge along his spine. Nova slid to his flank and let out a low growl that did not sound like simple focus. It sounded like a threat. Jenna knew that reaction. There was a scent for work and another for routine patrol. This one carried fear, sharp and metallic, still fresh. "Easy," she murmured. "I'm with you. Show me what's wrong." Bolt moved forward, paw by paw, toward a tangle of dry grass pressed against a cluster of stones. Nova circled wide, sweeping the edge of the patch. The nearer they drew, the tighter their bodies held. Tails rigid, necks arched. The growls deepened until they sounded like they lived inside the earth. From the back of the group, a young officer muttered, "They really don't like that spot." "That's why we pay attention," Elena said quietly. "Something here scared someone half to death." Bolt shoved his muzzle into the brittle stems. Scent hit him like a wall. He jerked back, then lunged again, barking once, sharp and urgent. Nova joined him, paws tearing at the grass. Dry stalks snapped and scattered. Beneath the shredded tangle lay a small backpack. It had once been bright purple. Dust dulled it now, but the cartoon shooting star on the front still showed through. One strap hung by a few threads. A zipper sat twisted and half open, teeth warped. Along the front pocket, near the star, a dark smear cut across the fabric. It might have been dirt. It might have been something that had dried the color of rust under the sun. Jenna's throat closed. "Please tell me that isn't Lily's," she said, though she already knew. Elena knelt, careful with every movement. "Same color her mother described," she murmured. "Same little star." She touched the edge of the stain with a gloved finger. Tiny flakes crumbled away. Whatever happened when this came off, it wasn't gentle. Mark's gaze slid past them toward the open strip of ground just beyond the stones. "If somebody carried her, why leave this?" he asked. "Why not take everything?" "Maybe she fought," Elena said. "Maybe the strap snapped while he was pulling her, and he didn't want to stop long enough to fix it." Bolt's panting changed. It came faster now, harsher, each breath dragging a panic scent from the cloth and the dirt. Nova backed away from the backpack, muzzle tilted toward the sand ahead, and let out another rough sound that made Jenna's stomach knot. She followed that line with her eyes and saw that the surface there was different. Wind had not yet had time to smooth it flat. Heavy impressions pressed into the sand, deeper than any child's shoes could make. Square heels, wide toes, thick tread. A repeating pattern walked in a straight line away from the stones. Boot prints, adult, heavy. Threaded through them, broken and uneven, were smaller marks. The shape of a little sole appeared once, then again, then vanished into a long, smeared drag. It looked like someone had tried to walk, lost strength, and been pulled whether those legs still wanted to move or not. Elena let her gaze travel slowly over the scene. Torn strap, stained fabric, deep tracks, and the stuttering line of the lighter ones. The desert had just drawn a clear picture whether they liked it or not. She didn't wander out here, she said. The thin hope in her voice was gone. She was taken. The words settled over the group like a new weight. Up until now, a small part of each person had clung to the idea of a lost child who had walked too far under a cruel sun. That story died here. Someone had come this way with purpose and walked off with a girl who had not chosen to follow. Bolt lowered his nose to the nearest print and growled, a sound so deep Jenna felt it in her chest. Nova stepped beside him, hackles a sharp line from neck to tail. The scent rising from those tracks was not only Lily's. It carried adult sweat, stale smoke, gasoline, and something sour that turned the back of Jenna's throat. Mark lifted his radio, voice clipped now. He called for the helicopter to tighten its circles and for outer units to shift. Jenna laid a hand on Bolt's neck, feeling tension hum under his fur. "You're doing good," she whispered. "Both of you. We see what you're telling us. If your heart is racing right now, you're not alone. Keep watching, because the way Bolt reacts to the next thing they find, it shakes every officer out there." Elena stood and followed the boot line with her eyes toward a low rise where the air shimmered. "Let them work," she said. "He thinks distance protects him. It won't." Bolt stepped forward, nose locked on the fresh scent trail carved by those heavy boots. Nova moved with him, shoulder to shoulder. The officers tightened their formation around the dogs and followed, each step driven now by more than protocol. The sun slid lower, shadows stretched across the sand, and the land ahead felt like a place holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when two determined animals and a desperate town finally caught up with the man who thought he had time. The boot prints pulled them into meaner country, where the desert stopped pretending to be flat and kind. Sand gave way to cracked earth and scattered stone, then to slopes cut deep by old flash floods. Cactus crowded closer together, taller now, arms twisted and spined like something that wanted people to stay away. Heat still clung to the rock, but a shadowy coolness had begun to gather in the low places. The day was slipping. Bolt's stride tightened. His nose hovered a few inches above the ground, following the deep boot marks as if they glowed. Nova stayed just off his shoulder, head up more often than down, sampling the air. Fear lay thick here now. Sweat, stale cigarette smoke, the sour trace of rope, and underneath it all the fading thread of Lily's scent, thin but still there. Between the heavy prints, lighter scuffs showed where small shoes had dragged and then almost disappeared. Jenna felt the ground tilt beneath her boots as the land broke open ahead. Dark cuts crossed the flats, ravines carved by storms that came hard and left fast. From a distance, they looked like simple shadows. Up close, they were stone corridors with walls high enough to hide anything. Elena glanced once at the map clipped to her vest, then snapped it shut. "Paper's done helping," she muttered. "We stick to the dogs." Bolt reached the edge of the nearest ravine and halted. The drop was only a few feet but steep, chipped by falling rock. The floor below was a channel of packed sand, driftwood, and old trash the rain had forgotten. Nova leaned over, nostrils flaring. She let out a single, sharp bark that bounced off the walls and came back warped. "They want down," Jenna said, throat dry. "The trail cuts through there." Mark scanned the jagged sides, imagining twisted ankles and broken legs. "We go slow," he said, "one at a time, no hero moves." Bolt was already easing onto the first ledge. He picked his way down with the casual balance of an animal who trusted his own weight. Nova followed, sliding the last bit in a spray of gravel. Jenna came after them sideways, boots searching for grip, one hand on the rock, the other welded to the leashes. Elena and 2 officers followed, then Mark, bringing the rest of the line behind. Inside the ravine, the world shrank. The walls rose on either side, stained with old water lines, cutting off most of the sky. The heat dulled a little, but the air felt heavier, as if it had been sitting here all day waiting for them. Every sound sharpened: the crunch of rock, the clink of a carabiner, the rasp of fabric against stone. Even breathing seemed loud. Bolt's tail dropped but stayed stiff, his head lowered until his nose almost brushed the channel floor. Nova's ears pinned forward, eyes fixed on the curve up ahead. The easy trot was gone. They moved with a hard pull now, dragging Jenna along the uneven ground. She stumbled once, caught herself, and kept going, heart pounding against her ribs. They turned a bend, and the ravine opened into a shallow rock bowl, a hollow scraped out of the earth by time and storms. Dead branches and trash had collected in one corner, bleached and tangled. On the far side, an old fence post leaned out of the ground at a wrong angle, splintered and streaked with rust where loops of ancient wires still clung. No one had fenced anything here in years. It looked like a bone the desert had forgotten to bury. Bolt lunged toward that post and exploded into a snarl that sounded nothing like training. Nova hit the end of her leash, barking in deep, broken bursts that made the back of Jenna's neck prickle. "Easy!" Jenna gasped, though her voice shook. "What do you have? Show me." Then she saw. At the base of the leaning post, half hidden by dead brush, a small body lay twisted on its side. Rope circled thin ankles and wrists, wrapped around the post itself, knotted so tight the fibers had bitten into skin. Pale grooves ringed the limbs where blood had fought to squeeze through. The sun had burnt what it could reach, the rest was mottled with dust. Lily Harper's face was raw at the edges from wind and heat. Dirt streaked her cheeks. Her eyelids sagged half-closed. Her mouth was parted, lips cracked white. For one terrible second she did not move at all, and the whole ravine held its breath. "Lily," Elena said, the name tearing out of her. The girl's shoulders shivered, her lashes trembled once, then again. A slow, rough breath rattled into her chest like it didn't quite fit there. It was enough. "She's breathing," Jenna said, almost choking. "She's breathing. She's alive." Elena spun toward the bend. "We've got the girl," she shouted. Her voice bounced off stone. "Alive, but in bad shape. Medics down here now. Stretcher, fluids, full kit, move." Mark dropped beside the post. "Knife," he snapped. An officer passed one without a word. Mark cut the rope at Lily's ankles first, sawing carefully away from her skin. The strands resisted, then snapped. He worked his way to her wrists, jaw set, blade slicing through each knot until the last loop fell away and slapped the dirt. Freed, Lily's body tipped sideways. Before anyone could catch her, Bolt stepped into the fall, pressing his shoulder against her chest. Nova eased under her limp hand until fingers sank into fur. "Hey, sweetheart," Jenna murmured, kneeling on the other side. "You're not alone anymore. We've got you. They've got you." Lily's hand clenched in Nova's coat, weak but deliberate. Her other hand found Bolt's collar and did not let go. She did not flinch at the echo of shouts or the scrape of more boots as officers squeezed into the bowl. She pressed her forehead into Bolt's neck like she was hiding behind a door. Two paramedics scrambled down, packs banging against the rock. One dropped to his knees beside Lily, gloved hands moving over pulse, pupils, and skin, talking the whole time in a calm, low voice. "Lily, my name's Rob," he said. "You did great. Stay with us. We're going to cool you down, give you some water, then get you out of here. Your mom's waiting." She blinked slowly as if the effort hurt. Her gaze slid from his face back to the dog's. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a sound, just air shaped into words. He said, "They'd find me," she whispered. Elna leaned closer. "Who said that, Lily?" "The man with the heavy boots," she murmured. "He said the dogs always come. He said they'd get here before the sky went dark." Jenna felt a cold line run through her chest despite the heat. Whoever had taken this child knew exactly how they would come hunting for her. "Did he say anything else?" Elena asked softly. "Anything at all?" Rob held a straw to Lily's lips and let a thin stream of water touch her tongue. She swallowed in tiny, painful gulps. Her eyes slid past Elena's shoulder toward the curve of rock where the ravine narrowed again. "He said I wasn't the last," she breathed. "He said if you reached me in time, it meant he could still choose someone else." Silence fell so hard it seemed to suck the air out of the bowl. The distant thump of the helicopter became a dull, faraway rhythm. Even the wind died at the rim. On the rock near the post, fresh scuffs showed where someone heavier had pushed off. A set of boot prints, deeper than the ones that led in, climbed out of the basin and headed into a narrow side channel that none of them had noticed on the way down. The edges of those tracks were still sharp. The sand hadn't had time to crumble back into them. Mark followed the line with his eyes, muscles in his jaw jumping. "He walked away from her," he said quietly, "left her tied here and just kept going." Elena stared into the tight, shadowed cut where the prints vanished. A small trickle of grit slid down one wall, as if something had brushed past not long before. The feeling that had been crawling under her skin all day finally took shape. "He's still close," she said. "He cannot be far in this mess of rock." "Not on foot." Bolt lifted his head from Lily's shoulder, nostrils flaring toward the side channel. A deep growl built in his chest, rising from somewhere older than training. Nova's tail stiffened. her eyes locked on the same dark slot in the stone. They had found Lily alive, clinging to two dogs like anchors in a world that had turned into heat and rope and fear. But the man who tied her to a forgotten post in a hidden bowl of rock had walked out under the same sky only minutes earlier. And from the way the scent burnt in Bolt and Nova's noses, every officer there knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The makeshift field station sat at the edge of the search zone like a stubborn island of order in the middle of dust. Two canopies had been thrown up beside the last patrol car, their sides snapping in the grit-heavy breeze. Inside the larger tent, folding tables held medical supplies, radios, and sweating water bottles. A portable fan rattled in one corner, pushing hot air from one side to the other without really cooling anything. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the dry scent of the desert and the metallic tang of fear. Lily lay on a padded stretcher near the center, a thin blanket pulled over her legs. An IV line ran from the crook of her elbow to a hanging bag. The harsh red of fresh sunburn had faded to a duller flush. Bandages covered the grooves on her wrists and ankles where rope had bitten in. Every so often, a tremor passed through her small frame, a shiver that never quite finished. People tried not to crowd her. A paramedic checked her vitals at careful intervals at the head of the bed. Another wrote notes on a clipboard. An officer stood by the entrance, keeping a path clear in case they had to move her fast. Voices stayed low, a steady murmur broken by clipped reports over the radio. The only ones Lily seemed to fully notice were the dogs. Bolt lay along one side of the stretcher, nose near her shoulder, eyes half closed but alert. Nova rested on the other, head by Lily's hand. When the girl stirred, fingers twitching, they rose slightly, not in alarm, but in quiet readiness. Whenever someone new stepped close, both shepherds watched with calm, measuring looks until they decided there was no threat. Elena stood at the foot of the bed, notebook loosely in her hand. They could wait until the hospital, until cooler air and clean sheets, but time pressed. The man who had walked away from that ravine was still out there. Whatever Lily remembered might be the only net they had to throw over him before he slipped past the edges of copper dunes for good. Jenna knelt beside Nova and gently guided Lily's fingers into the dog's thick fur. "You can hold on to her," she said. "She likes feeling useful." The child's hand moved in small strokes, slow at first, then more certain. The tightness in her shoulders eased. When she finally opened her eyes fully, they skipped past the paramedic and Elena and landed on Bolt's broad head. "He stayed," she murmured, voice rough from heat and rope. "He didn't leave." "None of us are leaving you," Jenna answered. "Not now." Elena waited until Lily's breathing found a steadier rhythm before she stepped closer. She crouched so her eyes were level with the girl's. "Lily," she said quietly, "I'm Detective Cruz. You did something very brave by holding on out there. I'm sorry we have to talk about him already, but what you remember can help make sure he never hurts anyone else. If you get tired, we stop, all right?" Lily's hand tightened in Nova's fur. The dog did not move away. Bolt's tail tapped once against the stretcher. "He wore a mask," Lily whispered. "Not funny, not like costumes. It was black, hard. His eyes were the only part I could see." "Like plastic?" Elena asked. "Like a helmet?" Lily nodded slightly. "When he got close, it clicked against his teeth. I heard it when he breathed on me." Elena's pen slid into her fingers. "Did he ever take it off?" Lily's gaze drifted to the tent wall. "He said I wasn't allowed to look at his face. He said if I tried, he'd make me go where nobody could even hang my picture. He said, people forget faster when there's no picture." Jenna felt anger flare, then shoved it down where it could not frighten the child. Nova's ears twitched once, as if she had heard thoughts, not words. "Do you remember how he smelt?" Elena asked. "Sometimes that helps us too." "Smoke," Lily said after a moment. "Like when my dad burns the meat outside. Metal, like coins when you keep them in your hand. And something sharp, like the stuff at the doctor, it hurt inside my nose." Bolt huffed, chest rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The sound was quiet, but every person near the stretcher heard it. "He had rules," Lily added, her voice thinner now. Elena leaned a little closer. "What kind of rules?" "I had to walk when he told me," she said. "When my legs stopped, he pulled. When I fell, he said I was wasting his time, and time was all I had to pay him. I couldn't scream because he said the desert ate noise and only dogs listened. I couldn't talk unless he asked first. If I asked about my mom, he pinched my arm and said I was being selfish." Her free hand crept toward Bolt's neck. He shifted closer until both her hands rested in warm fur. "Sometimes he hummed," she went on. "No words, just sounds. When he did that, he didn't pull so hard." "Was he big?" Elena asked. "Like your dad or bigger?" "Bigger," Lily answered. "His steps shook when we went down in the rocks. His boots were heavy. They made a thump like the trash truck does outside our house. That matched the deep prints in the sand." Elena nodded once, mostly to herself. "Lily," she said, "back in the ravine you told us he said the dogs would find you. Do you remember what else he said about them?" Lily swallowed. A tear slid from the corner of one eye. Nova leaned in and licked the salt line away. "He said the dogs always come when it's time to swap," she whispered. "He said Copper Dunes should thank them because you only notice missing kids when the dogs drag you the right way. He said you all would tell me I was lucky, but really, I was just early." Silence pressed in around the cot. Outside, somewhere beyond the canvas, a helicopter thudded over the darkening desert. "Did he say why he chose you?" Elena asked gently. "He said I was close," Lily said. "He watched our street. He knew when my dad took the trash out. He knew the cat's path. He knew my shoes made lights if I walked fast. He said he was practicing on our town." Her voice sank even lower. "He said Copper Dunes was just the beginning." Elena's hand stilled on the page. "Just the beginning of what?" "He said if you found me before the sky turned all the way black, he would just move faster," Lily replied. "He said there are other places that don't have dogs like this. He said if he left tonight, he could go far, and sometime soon, kids, there would be more scared than me. He said this town would remember for a little while, then go back to sleep, and he liked it when people were surprised." If this part makes your stomach twist, imagine being 6 years old and trying to explain this. Stay with me, because what happens when the dogs hear her last sentence, it changes everything. Elena forced moisture back into her mouth. "One more thing, Lily," she said. "Before he walked away, did he say where he might go or when he would come back here?" Lily's fingers clenched suddenly, burying themselves in both coats at once. Bolt's head lifted. Nova went utterly still, ears pinned forward, eyes locked on Lily's face. "He said he'd hear them," she whispered. "He said if the dogs ever started howling together on the edge of town, that would mean it was time for him to visit Copper Dunes again." Bolt let out a deep, low sound that vibrated through the stretcher. Nova answered with a short bark, not loud, but full of something that made every person in the tent turn toward the flap. Suddenly sure that somewhere beyond the line of parked cars and floodlights, the desert was listening too. Night dropped hard over Copper Dunes. The last band of color slipped off the horizon. leaving a flat white moon and a wind that felt sharper now that the sun was gone. Floodlights burnt at the field station behind them, humming over tents and vehicles. But beyond that circle, the desert turned into a wide, breathing shadow. Bolt and Nova stood with harnesses buckled, reflective strips catching thin flashes when they moved. Rest had been brief. Water, a quick check of paws and ribs, and a few minutes lying along Lily's stretcher while she clutched their fur in her sleep. When Elena stepped out, vest zipped, radio clipped to her shoulder again, both shepherds lifted their heads at the same moment. "They're ready," Jenna said, tightening a strap. "Trail's fresh. If we wait, we lose it." Mark glanced toward the dark line of low hills in the distance. "He figures night hides him," he said. "He hasn't met our night shift." Most of the searchers fell back to guard the town and the highway. A smaller team formed around the dogs: Jenna, Elena, Mark, and 4 officers in helmets and vests, rifles slung with slim lights taped to the barrels. Overhead, the helicopter widened its circles, its searchlight moving farther out like a slow, pale heartbeat. Jenna crouched and held out the evidence bag one more time. The torn scrap of Lily's backpack inside still carried that sour, metallic smell the dogs had keyed on earlier. Bolt pressed his nose to the plastic, drew in a long breath, then turned toward the open desert. Nova followed, eyes glinting once in the moon. Both leaned forward, every line of their bodies pointing the same way. "Track," Jenna whispered. The desert beyond the lights felt like another world. Heat had bled out of the top layer of sand, leaving it cool and fine under boots. Sounds seemed to travel twice as far: the scrape of soles, the soft click of claws, the faint rustle of dry stalks brushing uniforms. Somewhere off to the side, a coyote called once, then went quiet again, as if it had sensed something else out here tonight. Bolt moved at a steady trot, paws almost silent. Nova drifted slightly to one side, letting the trail tug her left and right as it twisted on the wind. The ground gave up the same mix Lily had tried to describe: sweat, smoke, metal, chemical sting, and rope. Where firm soil swallowed prints, that blend of smells clung low and stubborn, a ghost path only noses could read. Elena kept her flashlight low, touching the beam to rocks and holes instead of sweeping wide. Occasionally, the light caught a partial heel, a bent blade of grass, or a stone kicked clear of its dusty bed. Mark walked rear guard, radio murmuring by his ear as outer units checked in, making sure no one slipped past them toward the houses and porch lights. The land lifted as they walked, turning into knotted humps and ribs of stone. A rough line of rock jutted from the ground ahead, black against the sky, like a broken wall. Bolt's tail stiffened. His head dropped closer to the earth. Nova's breathing quickened in short, intent bursts. "He's headed for cover," Jenna muttered. "He knows where the hiding spots are." "Good," Elena replied under her breath. "Hiding spots keep scent in." At the base of the rocks, they found a narrow split between 2 boulders, so thin a beam had to slide sideways to see through. The dogs didn't hesitate. Bolt slipped into the slot, Nova right on his flank, dragging Jenna into a shadowed passage where the air grew cooler and close. The canyon hugged them on both sides, its walls rising steep enough to slice most of the moon away. Inside, their lights became the only clear shapes. Beams cut thin paths along stone, showing loose rock, old floodlines, and pockets of sand. Sound bounced around them and came back doubled: footsteps, breathing, and the faint clink of gear. Bolt rounded a bend and stopped so fast Jenna felt a jolt in her shoulders. Nova froze, ears knifed forward, nose testing the air. The smell ahead was thick and layered. Their beams found the camp tucked into a widening of the canyon floor. Charred stones formed a crude fire ring. Ash lay where wind hadn't stolen it yet. A metal pot sat on its side near the ring, handle warped. Coils of rope lay in a pile, several lengths cut, fibers splayed, faint grooves still pressed into them where something had pushed and pulled. An empty jug slumped near a wall, label peeling. Closer to the rock, smaller things glinted. A dull knife, a bent fork, a cheap plastic bracelet with faded beads, one missing, and a tiny shoe with a worn heel and a pattern no one recognized. None of it belonged to Lily. That somehow made the air feel colder. "He's been here more than once," Mark said, voice low. "You don't build all this for one night." "Or for one child," Elena added, throat tight. Bolt ignored the clutter after one circuit. He moved toward a darker crack at the back of the hollow where the canyon narrowed again, nostrils flaring hard. Nova followed, both dogs straining so intensely that Jenna had to plant her boots and lean away to keep from being pulled off her feet. "They still have him," she said. "The scent's strong." "Then we go small," Mark answered. 2 by 2, no one rushes past the dogs. They funneled into the throat of the canyon, shoulders not far from touching stone. The ground angled down, loose pebbles rolling away from their steps. Somewhere ahead, a single stone bounced and clattered that none of them had kicked. Every spine in the file straightened. Bolt lunged, ripping slack from the line. Nova exploded forward with him, barking once, a sharp sound that shattered the tight quiet. Lights snapped up. A man stood at the next curve, where the canyon turned again. A dark jacket blurred his outline. A hard, dull mask covered his nose and mouth. In his right hand he held a length of rusted pipe. For half a beat he froze under the beams, then he swung. The pipe sliced toward the brightest shape. Jenna, too close and with nowhere to sidestep fully. Bolt launched before metal reached her, driving his body into the man's arm. The blow slid off Jenna's shoulder instead of crashing into her skull. Pain flared hot along the muscle, but she stayed upright. Steel screamed against stone. The man stumbled, then came back up with ugly speed. He brought the pipe around again, this time crashing it into Bolt's ribs. A sharp yelp tore out of the dog as he hit the ground and rolled. The sound ripped through Jenna worse than the impact had. Nova hit low, jaws clamping around the man's wrist. He snarled behind the mask and tried to rip free, but she hung on, every muscle locked. The pipe skidded away into darkness. Officers surged forward, voices overlapping, shouts, warnings, the scrape of gear. "Police! Show us your hands! Get down!" He drove a knee into Nova's side. She grunted, grip tightening. His free hand dived toward his belt. Elena saw the motion and slammed her shoulder into his chest, driving him into the wall. Mark crashed in from behind, arms locking around the suspect's torso and forcing him down to one knee. Bolt was already up again, hurt but relentless. He lunged for the man's leg, teeth closing on thick fabric, dragging his weight sideways. The canyon filled with grunts, barks, and boots sliding on stone. "Other arm!" Mark barked. 2 officers grabbed the free wrist, twisted it back, and snapped cuffs around it. Nova released when Jenna shouted the command, chest heaving. Bolt only let go when she called him off by name, voice steady. Blood darkened his fur where the pipe had struck, but his eyes stayed locked on the man. They forced the suspect to his knees, cheek pressed against the rock. Elena reached down and ripped the mask away. His face was the kind that disappeared in a crowd. Brown hair, average features, and a nose that had healed crooked once. His eyes did not look frightened. They looked mildly irritated, as if someone had stepped on his plans, not his neck. You walked away from a tied-up child, Elena said. You thought the dark would hide you. It didn't. He smiled without warmth. I knew the dogs would bring you, he replied. His voice matched Lily's memory exactly. Low, bored, and threaded with smoke. Throw them a trail, and they drag the whole town after it. You're finished, Mark said. It ends here. The man's gaze flicked to Bolt's bloodied side, then to Nova's bared teeth. You caught the one who carries, he said, not the one who points. A chill moved under Elena's vest. Who points? She asked. Who tells you where to go? The towns, the kids, he answered. I walk where I'm told. Someone else picks the street, the door, and the time. Copper Dunes was a start. He's already reading the next map. Where is he? Elena demanded. Give me something. The suspect laughed once, an ugly, small sound that bounced off the stone. You think he gives me a name? All I get is a line. How long until the dogs start howling? Tonight, you were right on cue. They hauled him to his feet and marched him back toward the wider part of the canyon, rifles tracking his spine. Bolt limped beside Jenna, ignoring the sting in his side, still watching the prisoner. Nova stayed on the other flank, nostrils working as if memorizing every detail of the man's scent. When they stepped out beneath the open sky again, the moon hung higher, flooding the rocks with pale light. Patrol vehicles waited at the canyon mouth, red and blue lights turning the stone edges into flickering color. Radios crackled with confirmation that the suspect was in custody, that the town could exhale at least a little. Doors slammed. Engines rumbled. The car carrying the man rolled away toward Copper Dunes. Bolt did not watch it go. He climbed onto a low boulder, sat with his tail wrapped around his paws, and stared past the vehicles toward the empty stretch of desert beyond. Nova stood beside him, head lifted, tasting the wind. They had followed the trail, found the camp, and helped bring down the man who tied Lily to a forgotten post. Yet the way the air moved tonight, carrying dust and the faint echo of a frightened child's words, told them this was only part of something larger. Both dogs kept their eyes on the thin line where sand met sky, as if they already sensed that somewhere out there another pair of boots was moving. Another plan waking up just beyond the reach of flashing lights. By late morning, Copper Dunes looked like a town trying hard to breathe again. Outside the small police station, a portable stage and folding chairs crowded the plaza, with hand-painted signs, "Welcome home, Lily, and thank you, K9," taped to the brick. The place filled until there was almost no standing room left. Teachers, mechanics, cashiers, kids on shoulders, retirees in lawn chairs. Everyone drifted toward the same front row, where Lily Harper sat between her parents. Bandages wrapped her ankles. A strip of gauze hugged her temple. She looked smaller than in the school picture on the missing posters, but when Bolt shifted, her eyes jumped to him at once. Nova flicked an ear, and a quick smile tugged at Lily's mouth. Bolt and Nova waited beside Officer Jenna Park at the bottom of the steps, coats brushed, new blue and gold collars catching the light. Sheriff Hal Moran stepped to the microphone. His uniform was pressed, his hat tucked under one arm, but the tired lines on his face were still there. Copper Dunes doesn't usually draw cameras, he said. We don't have a stadium or a mall. We have one grocery store, one good taco truck, and a whole lot of people who know each other's kids. When a child disappears here, there is no such thing as someone else's problem. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Claire Harper twisted a tissue into a tight knot. Daniel's hand rested steady on Lily's shoulder. 3 days ago, the sheriff went on, we watched officers, volunteers, medics, pilots, and a pair of very stubborn dogs walk into that desert and refuse to turn back. Today, Lily is sitting where she belongs. A big part of that is because two noses followed what the rest of us couldn't see. He turned toward the K-9 unit. Jenna gave the leashes a small lift. Bolt straightened. Nova's ears tipped forward. Officer Bolt and Officer Nova tracked their way across open ground, through cactus and rock, into a ravine where a child had been tied and left, Moran said. For their courage and service, it is my honor to present them with the Copper Dunes Medal of Valor. An aide brought a small tray. The sheriff knelt, fastening a ribbon and medal around Bolt's thick neck, then around Nova's. The dogs stood still, taking it with the same calm they brought to the search. When the second medal settled, applause crashed over the plaza. Before the clapping faded, Lily slid off her chair. The crowd parted without being asked. She walked down the center aisle on bare legs, hospital bracelet flashing, and stopped in front of Bolt. She wrapped both arms around his neck and pressed her face into his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "You came anyway." Bolt's tail thumped softly against the steps. Nova eased under Lily's arm until the girl's hand rested on both of them. Cameras caught the image, but most people there just watched with their own eyes and tried not to cry. Claire and Daniel joined her. Claire grabbed Jenna's hands. "You trusted them when praying was all we had," she said. Jenna shook her head. "They trusted the scent," Jenna replied. "I just hung on tight." Daniel turned to Detective Elena Cruz and Sergeant Mark Walker. "You went back out even after she was safe," he said. "We couldn't pretend it ended in that ravine," Elena answered. "Not after what Lily told us, and not after what we found at the camp." The sheriff's speech rolled on, thanking volunteers and air support, folding the chaos of the search into a neat list of names. The town clapped on cue. On the surface, the story was getting the ending people needed. Danger, rescue, medals, a bright day. Inside the station, the air was cooler and smelt faintly of coffee. Forensics reports lay spread across a table near the glass doors. Through them, Elena could see the backs of people's heads and the flash of cameras. "They finished the comparisons," Mark said quietly. "Two adult tread patterns at the camp. One matches our guy in holding. The other doesn't hit on any database we've got." Elena studied a photo of overlapping prints, one deep, square, and familiar, the other narrower, pulling a little at the heel and then veering away. "Too much rope for one victim, too," she said. "And that bracelet we found? Bought in a strip mall 3 towns over. A girl went missing there last year. No trace, no body, no arrest. Feels less like a bad impulse and more like a system," Mark muttered. "Our man says he just carries and leaves kids where he's told. I'm starting to believe him, and I hate it." Elena looked back out at the steps. Lily sat again between her parents, Bolt's head resting on her knee. Nova sprawled at her feet, medals glinting. The news anchors were already practicing their closing lines. "We stopped one monster," she said. "The one who tied the knots. But someone else is still out there watching. Someone who knows how to pick quiet towns and kids who walk to their doors alone." Mark nodded once. "Then we make it clear this town is watching back," he said. He wanted to be sleepy. He chose wrong. "If you believe these dogs earned their medals 100 times over, let them know in the comments after you hear the last thing Elena realizes." Out on the steps, Bolt lifted his head. His ears pricked toward the parking lot. Nova's tail stopped mid-swing. At the same instant, both dogs turned away from the children asking to touch their medals and stared past the rows of cars. Jenna felt the leashes go tight in a way she recognized. "What is it?" she murmured. Elena stepped closer to the glass and followed their gaze. At the far edge of the lot, a lone sedan idled near the exit. The driver's door hung open. A figure stood beside it. Plain cap, neutral clothes, no camera, no phone raised. They weren't talking to anyone. They weren't clapping. They were simply watching the cluster of people around the dogs and the bandaged girl between them. For a second, the figure's head tilted, as if memorizing the scene. Even at this distance, Elena felt the odd certainty that the gaze was fixed on two small flashes of blue and gold against black fur. Then the person slid into the car, closed the door, and eased into the thin stream of traffic leaving town. Outside, the applause swelled again as Lily laughed at something Jenna said, fingers buried in thick fur. To most of Copper Dunes, the story had ended here. Child rescued, villain caught, heroes honored. Elena kept her eyes on the empty patch of pavement where the car had idled and felt a familiar tightness settle under her ribs. Bolt and Nova stayed turned toward the road long after the dust had settled. As if listening for something only they could hear, they had their medals. Lily had her parents. Copper Dunes had its ceremony. But the desert around the town was wide, and somewhere beyond the map's edge, someone who liked quiet streets was already deciding which place to look at next. Bolt and Nova had done more than follow a scent. They had saved a child, a 6-year-old girl named Lily Harper, from the desert that had swallowed her presence and the man who had taken her. The world around Copper Dunes had stopped for hours while those two dogs guided officers through heat, scrub, rocks, and shadows to a narrow ravine where every moment counted. By the time the sun had dropped low in the sky, Lily was safe, her small body freed from ropes that had burnt her skin and drawn the color from her cheeks. The family had been reunited. Smiles fragile but real, arms wrapped tight around each other, relief and gratitude etched into every wrinkle and crease on the parents' faces. What had seemed impossible, finding a missing child across miles of open desert under the relentless sun, was accomplished because of two canines whose bravery and focus did not falter even when human exhaustion set in. Through the trial of night and canyon, through confrontation with the man who had wielded a pipe and masks and rules that crushed a child's day into fear, Bolt and Nova had remained steadfast. Even when injury struck one of them, even when the desert seemed to fold into itself around the faint trail of a suspect who had walked through shadows, the dogs kept moving, noses locked on the signs invisible to the human eye. They had been more than companions. They were the embodiment of trust, loyalty, and determination. The officers around them, skilled and trained, had been guided, corrected, and protected by those same instincts. Every officer, every sergeant, and every detective knew that, without the dogs, the hours of searching might have ended in tragedy. The town of Copper Dunes, once quiet and routine, had watched the unfolding of what became a full-scale rescue operation, from the first anxious calls of missing child reports, through grid searches into ravines and cactus fields under the glare of helicopters, and finally to the small clearing where the girl's safety was secured. Every news van outside the station, every neighbor who had joined in the search, and every single heart holding hope and fear in the same moment had witnessed the consequences of dedication, training, and instinct combined. Bolt and Nova had not just located a child. They had exposed a larger ongoing threat, a pattern that showed one man's actions were part of something more calculated, more sinister. Without their intervention, Copper Dunes might have faced continued danger that residents could not see. The case had changed the town, altering the sense of safety, revealing the fragility of routine, but also proving the power of teamwork between humans and animals. The small desert town had learnt that vigilance paired with trust in the right partners could overcome danger in ways that seemed improbable at first glance. It was a story about more than finding one missing child. It was a story about the bravery of K9s, the instinct and focus that no human could replicate, and the way that animals could sense danger, act decisively, and protect lives in ways that defied expectation. Bolt and Nova had followed trails that twisted, split, and vanished under layers of wind-blown sand and underbrush. They had located physical evidence, torn straps, footprints, signs of struggle, and the faint lingering traces of a suspect's passage through the desert. Each clue was followed with precision that the human mind could not replicate without the dog's extraordinary senses. Each time they signaled, each change in direction or posture guided the officers closer to the girl. Human skill complemented the dog's instinct, but it was impossible to separate their heroism from the outcomes achieved. Even after Lily had been rescued, even after the sun rose on the town to mark the start of a new day, Bolt and Nova remained symbols of vigilance. Medals were pinned, hands shook, cameras flashed, and the applause echoed down streets that had once been silent with fear. Lily hugged them, resting her head against their fur, her words soft but imbued with gratitude and understanding beyond her years. Her parents thanked the officers, acknowledging both human and canine effort. But the full story of what had been faced, of what had been survived, remained known in part to those who had been there, and in part to the desert itself, which still held echoes of footsteps and scents that could tell more than words ever could. The town had witnessed a rescue, but the broader threat, the ongoing danger, remained a shadow beyond sight. Every day since, Copper Dunes PD continues to receive calls, reports of unusual sightings, alerts, and reports that might otherwise be considered minor. Each time, Bolt and Nova position themselves near the doors of the station, their stance alert, ears flicking, muscles tensed, and eyes scanning the horizon where desert meets sky. They listen, they wait, they observe. Every so often, a soft whine escapes, a reminder to officers and residents alike that vigilance is never complete. Elena Cruz watches them, quietly, noting the way their behavior changes with subtle signals in the air. She wonders what they sense, what patterns they detect that humans cannot. She imagines that their keen senses might be picking up the return of a threat, the approach of someone who believes the desert hides him, or the preparation for an action that could disrupt the fragile sense of security Copper Dunes has rebuilt. Each look the dogs give toward the wide horizon reminds her and her team that the case, while officially closed in terms of immediate rescue, is not truly over. Someone else might make a mistake. Someone else might underestimate the combination of instinct, training, and determination that defines these animals. In that way, the story remains open-ended. Copper Dunes is safer, yes, and Lily Harper remains with her family, smiling and healing. But the desert beyond the town is wide, filled with shadows and potential. Bolt and Nova are not just pets or helpers. They are frontline defenders, guardians whose presence shapes the behavior and readiness of the officers around them. The town has learned to rely on humans and animals in tandem, understanding that one cannot fully succeed without the other. Every call, every alert, every step the dogs take reinforces the lesson that vigilance, skill, and courage are the truest measure of safety. To those watching this story unfold on your screen, the lesson is both simple and profound. Animals, when trained, trusted, and guided with care, can be heroes in the most literal sense. Bolt and Nova have demonstrated that courage and instinct, combined with human oversight, can prevent tragedies, save lives, and uncover larger threats that would otherwise remain hidden. Their story is a testament to the effectiveness of teamwork, to the bonds formed between humans and dogs, and to the profound impact such bonds can have on a community. Copper Dunes will not soon forget the night when two dogs turned instinct into life-saving action. Their bravery is documented in medals, photographs, and memory, but the true measure lies in the lives they protect and the fear they avert before it takes root. If you believe these dogs earned their medals 100 times over, let them know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe animals can be heroes. Tell us in the comments which country you are watching from. By staying with this channel, you will see more real-feeling stories of survival, justice, and the animals and people who refuse to give up, proving again and again that vigilance, courage, and teamwork are the pillars that turn potential tragedy into triumph. Every time Bolt and Nova stand at the station doors, noses pointed toward the desert, Elena Cruz reflects on the lesson learned. Preparedness is not about eliminating danger entirely, but about anticipating it, responding to it, and trusting those who perceive what humans alone cannot. The town can sleep a little easier. The girl is home, but the shadow of a larger threat remains, and the next step, the next call, might bring the dogs back into action. Watching their focused eyes, their measured breaths, it is impossible not to feel that vigilance is ongoing, that every call, every sound of wind across the desert, every shift of shadow across the rocks could signal a moment where instinct and training again save a life. This story, this case, changed a town, demonstrated the depth of trust between humans and animals, and reinforced that heroism can come in forms both expected and unseen. Bolt and Nova are more than dogs. They are partners, protectors, and living proof that courage comes in every shape, that commitment saves lives, and that when humans and animals work together, the impossible becomes achievable.